dress themselves, communicate. They have no idea who their relatives are. And then for years, they would put in a tube feeding. And that would keep the person alive over quite a period of time. And from my perspective and my values, I didn't see any excuse for that. And so defining dementia is, and I'm going to say probably, since it's 1 in 3 Americans, most of you have had experience with this. And, you know, they progressively lose their memory. They have difficulty thinking and reasoning. They gradually are unable to carry out the tasks of daily living, eating, dressing. And then they experience changes sometimes in personality, mood, and behavior. And in some instances, they can become quite violent, and then they end up sedated. We call it chemical restraint. It's hard to watch. I mean, you know, they're sitting in a wheelchair, you know, I just say they're drooling in their soup. I mean, what is the purpose of life at that point? Dementia is defined in 7 stages, and I'm not going to go through all of those or not tonight, but there are fairly distinct stages of what's going on for the person. Next slide. So here's what I really came to do, contrary to my lack of voice. So there's a book called, that's put out by Compassionate Choices, My End-of-Life Decisions, an Advanced Planning Guide and Toolkit. So let's say you know someone, like my mother has early dementia. I'm having a little trouble getting her to sign it, but anyway, we're going through it over and over again so that she understands what she's signing. And her common refrain is, oh, you know what, I want die. You're a nurse, it'll be fine. But the thing is, these are things that augment the other forms that you need when you're looking at end-of-life decisions. The legal issues have to do with getting a medical proxy or a power of attorney, a financial power of attorney, a living will, and then I encourage everybody to fill out this form. It's called the MOST form, M-O-S-T. It's the Colorado Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment, and it has to do with your wishes. Would you like CPR? Do you not want CPR? Would you like to be tube fed or not tube fed? Would you like a trial period with a tube feeding or not? And it just goes through these. This is a legal document. It's signed by you and your doctor. This information that's in here about planning for dementia care, you need to, you fill out this form, it's signed by witnesses, and then you would be, and it's very, they're very particular questions. If I can't feed myself, do I want all the treatments available? If I don't recognize my family, do I still want all of the treatments available? Or would I prefer to let go of life at that point? So you fill out this form, you get all your witnesses, it's a little bit complicated, and then you will attach this to your power of attorney. So everyone understands what your wishes are in terms of dementia care. Quick, I'm losing my voice again, please. Thank you. I put up this slide because there's a book that was written by the CEO of Compassionate Choices called Finish Strong. And in that book, she recommends that you have the person on video saying what their wishes are, so that that can be shown if any kind of healthcare provider is pushing back against what this person wanted, even though they can't speak for themselves. There's a lot of other tasks up there that you certainly want to be thinking of. Some of them Jeet will be talking about shortly, about your preferences, and then business and financial tasks. Next slide, please. There's a section of this book that's on dementia values, and the questions, they sort of ask you to think very clearly about what your preferences are, get them all down on paper so that someone could read it, and it's in preparation for filling out the form that includes all the other issues. Do you want antibiotics? Would you want dialysis? Would you want... Next slide, please. I talked a bit about advanced directives. These are the most important. Doing a living will, a medical durable power of attorney, and the thing about medical power of attorney is you want to be sure that you have someone that can be assertive, bordering on aggressive. Because when you get into an ER situation, people are trying, everybody there has their own preferences and their ideas, and you're just getting on a conveyor belt oftentimes towards, perhaps ICU and a ventilator. And so you have to have the person that's going to be able to really fight strongly for your preferences. It does not require a lawyer to fill out an advance directive. You can download a power of attorney and fill it out that conforms with Colorado law, but I oftentimes recommend that people actually try as best they can to talk to a lawyer about it. So they've dotted the I's, they've crossed their T's, and they know exactly what will happen at the end of their life, hopefully, if you can get all the healthcare workers, flying in the same direction. These documents just explain what you would prefer. Next slide. So the best thing is to be proactive. I think this organization, Compassionate Choices, got me to think about what do I want, because I've been putting off and thinking, well, I'm not at the end of my life. The horizon's definitely shorter, but I'm not at the end of my life. And so it's really made me get front and center with this kind of information. Discuss your priorities with your family. Ensure that your doctor would be willing to participate in medical aid in dying. Don't wait. Ask your doctor. Be sure they know. Be sure they understand what's involved. And then another thing you need to be aware of, too, is sometimes you're going to have to locate a pharmacy that will actually prescribe the medications to you, because some pharmacies won't participate in this program. If you're going to be in an assisted living or a nursing home, you also need to find out, will they comply with your wishes? So these are things that people wouldn't ordinarily think about, but they're very important. And have those initial conversations with family members. And I can attest the idea that it has been really hard for me to talk to my mom about this topic. And I was going through this book with her, and I started to cry, and she grabbed it from me and said, "Oh, for goodness sakes, just give it to me, I'll read it." But then she wouldn't sign it. So we're working on it. It's a process, and it's a tough process. Next slide, please. Blip again. So I don't see that death is the enemy. It's certainly something I've seen a lot of. The enemy is intolerable terminal suffering and pain. And on occasion, I've had palliative doctors tell me that pain medications will take care of all of the pain. And yet I've witnessed situations where it just didn't cover it. In particular, like nerve pain is just some of the most difficult pain to treat. The only thing that matters is that you're comfortable and that whoever you're with is respecting your values and they're listening to what you're saying and they're able to go along with your values. And then, of course, there's always room for more kindness. Although if you've been in the ER lately, I would just say, oh well. Next slide. This is a quote from a woman that was 36. She had brain cancer, and she had a very poor prognosis. And this is her husband's quote, saying, "She fought so hard to live. We couldn't believe that she had to fight so hard to die." She was missing some of the papers. She understood that she had everything that she needed. She was in a small community. They ended up flying her to LA, and even in LA they were looking for people that would help them out with medical aid in dying. And can you imagine the pain of her husband trying to get through all this in addition to her pain and suffering? So, next. And this is a little bit about compassionandchoices.org. Everything I've talked about here you can find on the website. There are also handouts back there that you're welcome to take. If I don't have a lot of copies of this book, it's very good. And there's a postcard back there that if you just fill it out and send it in, they'll send you one of these books if you're not comfortable with just downloading the forms online. And that's a picture of the book. And questions. But do we want to wait until everybody speaks and then?
No, people can fire questions to you now.
Oh, okay.
Something to
Yeah,
ask.
please.
Oh, she has a question.
Mary Rose has a question and then,
Do you want to give her the mic so
Oh.
they can hear?
I can talk, I know.
okay, I'll repeat the
They
question.
won't be able to see it, or you can repeat it. This isn't for the room, it's for the.
I can repeat the question.
Hi, Rosie. So if you already have at the hospital, do not resuscitate DNR on file, can you reverse that?
Yes, at any time.
Okay, that was it.
You just would go back and get another one of these forms and say, I prefer to be resuscitated. You change your answers on this.
Oh, yeah, say it into the.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, say I prefer, at this time to be resuscitated, sign it. Your doctor has to sign this. So that's an important piece of this. Most of these documents, your doctor doesn't sign. But this one, it's a legal state form, and your doctor has to sign it. Good question. Are there other questions?
We have a few. First question, how do you know that the drugs will allow for a peaceful death? Will you just stop breathing? Will you not be conscious?
Repeat the questions so that they can hear.
The question was, how do you know that this will lead to a peaceful death?
Correct.
And what is the process of dying using the drugs? Did I paraphrase that correctly?
Yeah, do you just stop breathing or do you go unconscious?
You don't go unconscious, you're asleep, in a very deep sleep, and so you're not feeling any pain anymore. And in general, in general, you go to sleep, and you have some drugs you have at 1 hour. You have another drug you take at 30 minutes, which digoxin, which interferes with your heart and how it's working. And then finally you take the drugs that will kill you. They're basically overdoses of hypnotics.
And the other question we have here, I believe, does Medicare pay for the drugs that are prescription drugs?
No, the federal government hasn't passed a Right to Die Act. And so Medicare and Medicaid will not pay for the medications that you'll be prescribed for this, for medical aid in dying. And from what I understood from talking with another nurse at Denver Health, the cost of the prescription for all those meds is about $800 to $1,000.
Okay.
Not covered.
Final question for now. Is it better that a medical power of attorney, not a family member, would it make it less emotional? So I believe they mean, is it better for somebody with power of attorney to make the call as opposed to a family member?
That's, I think, a question that you need to answer for yourself. I have heard from other people that the spouse, and I've seen it too, having your spouse be your power of attorney or medical power of attorney can be very, it doesn't always work because the spouses having, so many difficulties in a very emotional spot, and they thought they could do what you wanted. I mean, because I can say that today. My husband over there, he'll do what I say. I still think he'll do what I say because he's obnoxious when he's mad. But sometimes if you don't have a family member or husband or wife that can get assertive bordering on aggressive, it can be a very big challenge for them to go ahead and give you the medications and follow through with it. So, is that all the questions? I think it is. All right. Kerry, you want to go ahead?
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Well, we've been talking about a medical model, a legal model that's passed by the legislature, became law. I'm going to be talking about a non-medical model that's available for people who either are unable or unwilling to use this particular approach, the medical aid in dying. There are many people who don't either fit the criteria, aren't dying from the right diseases, and in the 6-month period could be suffering intolerably for many, many months, beyond 6 months. So it's for the people outside of that system that I'll be talking about mostly. So let's go back to the basics. I think any time is a good time to talk about how to die on your own terms. First of all, it's a reality, right? Nobody gets out of this world alive. Death is just as natural as birth. And I had the good fortune of living and working overseas in many different countries where that's the case today. They still consider that this is one process. The family is involved. When I was born in 1940, that's how it was here in the States, in the small town that I lived in. And since then, we've created a system that Diane has dealt with and fought with for years that has taken a tremendous amount of control out of the hands of the family and of the individual. So let's go to the next slide. We're talking, she said, about a bad death. We're talking tonight about a good death. What is a good death, really? How do you describe it? How do you know it? How do you recognize it? And how do you make sure it happens to you? Let's go to the next slide. Actually, I'm going to try our system here. Dignity, being treated with gentleness, kindness, compassion, being accepted, your decisions matter. I believe that you own your own life. Life is a gift, right? You didn't earn it. You didn't win it. It was given to you, and if you are the owner, you should be the one to really decide what happens at the end. Nobody else. So that's a good death. Dignity, gently, and painlessly. Here we're going to try. Okay, good. So, when I was born, 80% of the people died at home, surrounded by loved family members, maybe the pastor from the local church, and so on. That was the way it happened. And only about 20% of them died in institutions of various kinds. Today, it's the absolute reverse of that. Today, most people run the risk of dying like this poor soul, hooked up to all the tubes and wires and being kept dying. This man is not being kept living, he's being kept dying because the medical technology allows these institutions and organizations to just, my wife, she's a little bit sarcastic. She says it's just like a taxi. You keep the numbers going as long as possible. Next, here we go. Okay. So how should we die? Beauty, care, respect. When the first medical aid in law was passed about 22 years now ago in Oregon, the legislature insisted that a annual survey be conducted of the people going through this process and ask them basically, what bothers you about this process of dying in America? And it wasn't the pain, it wasn't the huge expenditure of money, it wasn't being a bother and a burden on your family. Those are all on the list. But number one, every single year so far, has been loss of personal autonomy. Basically, people were saying, when I become vulnerable and I can't defend myself, other people are telling me what's going to happen to me. That's the thing that bothers them. So if you want to die on your own terms, you need to be prepared. Use these tools that Diane was talking about. And my organization has others as well who will share with you. So, I love this slide because it points out who the three pushback organizations, the usual suspects, who are opposing your right to die on your own terms. And we have the religious people who feel and often say that it's not your choice. You don't have a dog in this fight. It's up to us, it's up to the way we interpret religion to tell you what to do. We have the politicians who often are representing powerful interests. Medical institutions make tons and tons, billions. I've lost count. I think it's over about, I won't give you the number, but you can imagine that dying is a very profit-making opportunity. And if you are the product. And then the other is the medical institutions themselves, that they have many interests in how you die, when you die, what happens to you, what they're going to allow. The conveyor belt that Diane talked about is a real thing. And it's part of the problem is that they have vested interests and they have rules and protocols they have to follow. And it's taken out of your hands. It's often taken out of the hands of your family members. And unless you have a strong power of attorney, the generic word for that is surrogate, someone who can stand for you, then you are really almost a victim. You can't get off the conveyor belt. You can't get off the, well, you can, but the end is always the same. So I love this slide for it shows us what's going on, but I hate the slide because it looks like it's me in the bed there trying to get my rights honored at the end of my life. But I'll fight to the very end. Now, the doctors are insiders. They know how this system works. They're the ones who actually, sign the directives and all those kinds of things. So Stanford, let's look at the next slide. Yeah. Stanford Medical School asked over 1,000 doctors, if you're facing end of life in this situation we're talking about, how do you want to die? And it was amazing. Look at here. 90% don't want CPR. Almost 90% don't want ventilation. Dialysis, no way. Chemotherapy, no, never. Surgery and on down, they don't want all this stuff that the conveyor belt delivers. What's wrong with this picture, folks? Huh? All they want is the drugs at the end, the palliative care to be kept from pain. And when I was giving this talk in New Mexico before they passed their law, a doctor stood up and said, it's not our fault. We doctors are employees. We have to follow the protocol. And so I said, welcome on board. Would you like to become a member? So, the ethics. The doctors, are taught to do no harm. And the whole mindset coming out of the medical schools for all these decades is that we have to keep people alive. If they die, I failed. Also, the track record of the medical institution suffers if too many people die on their watch. So there's all these incentives to just keep it going. But it becomes a matter of prolonging death. It's not a matter of extending life anymore. That's the issue. Here are some of the kinds of conditions that Diane was referring to that can put you in a situation where you don't have the choices. I'm on that list. I got that diagnosis, congestive heart failure. So I have a personal interest in this myself. I was mentioning that I was giving a testimony before the legislature of my state, Minnesota, kind of like we're talking right now. And the next person that got up and talked, he said, "We physicians are not killers, and we cannot be put in a situation where we are ending people's lives. And if this law passes, it'll be a slippery slope, and people will be killing, grandma for her money or whatever, that kind of thing." And I turned to my wife and I said, "Ann, that's my cardiologist standing up there. He's the guy that has to turn off the pacemaker and the defibrillator that I have in my chest." And so he and I got together and had a heart-to-heart talk with my cardiologist, and we laughed, we had a drink, and I said, "Well, are you going to turn this off? In my state, I'll be shocked 9 times before I die if I let it go on." And he said, "Well, I'm a devout Catholic. I went to Notre Dame. I financially support a major Catholic politician, et cetera, et cetera." And I said, "Well, are you going to turn it off or not?" And he said, "Well, I will refer you. If my Catholic morals prevent me from doing that for you, I'll refer you to a colleague who might be able to help." So you really need to know where your doctor stands, what the medical institution, the hospital, what their policies are, and whether they'll even honor all these directives and so on. It requires a lot of personal looking up information, talking to people, and finding out facts before you decide. So, how did this whole death with dignity, right to die movement start? It really started in 1980. The original organization was called Hemlock Society. Many folks who have been around for years and as old as me remember that. I joined that fairly early in the early 80s, and it was the go-to place for first place you could talk openly about end of life on your own terms. In 2004, the organization split into 2 parts. The part that the organization that Diane was talking about, and Final Exit Network, the organization that I am representing here. And we agree with each other. These laws are necessary and important, but they're not sufficient. There are quite a number of people who, in the state of Colorado, even with the law, this law doesn't fit for them for a number of medical and personal reasons. So Final Exit Network, the original founders and the board members decided nationally, it's a national organization, we need to have resources and options and information available for the people who the laws do not cover. And so it all began with this book, kind of a bombshell book. It's written by Derek Humphrey, a British journalist who had written several other books. And his first book was about his wife, who was dying from cancer, very, very painful, untreatable situation, and living in London. And he helped her die, and he wrote a book about that. And that was the first book of 4 or 5 books. And this one is the one that caused all the controversy because it's called Final Exit, The Practicalities of Self-Deliverance and Assisted Suicide for the Dying. These are people who are actually facing the end of their lives. It's actual practicalities, in other words, how to, the nitty-gritty details, how you can pull your own plug. And it was a New York Times bestseller for a long, long time. There are millions of copies sold in many languages. It's available in your public libraries. It's available online as an ebook. I'd recommend that because you want the most up-to-date information available. But this is what Final Exit Network is set up to do. We have no relationship with the book. We get nothing from the book, but we still believe it's an excellent resource for you to look at. So here's our new logo, Final Exit Network. Our vision is basically that when people are facing this intolerable, intractable, end-of-life condition, that they should, not just in Colorado, but all over the country, have the option to die peacefully and legally. That's a vision for the future. Our actual mission, our ongoing mission, is to provide education. We provide information, resources, options to people, very, very specific, very detailed, for practical, peaceful ways to end their lives. We also have a cadre, a group of exit guides, trained people who will go out and actually provide information to you, sit with you if you want them there when you die. And this is all part of what we do day in and day out. We often end up having to defend this right. We spend lots of money over the years fighting laws that prevent people from having these options. So, education. We do research. We have a group of, we're all volunteers. We have a group of researchers, technical people, chemists, other people trying to do more research and finding options. We have lawyers that we will send out to defend your choice if you're getting pushed back and you want some free legal services to get in the face of the institution that's denying you. It gets their attention when a lawyer calls up. They're thinking, uh-oh, we're talking maybe big bucks here for some settlement or a awkward lawsuit. And it's surprising that how quickly the medical ethical committee of the hospital intervenes and say, just a minute, slow this conveyor belt down. Let's take a look at this. So that's one service that we provide. Next slide. We also deal with the dementia problem, and it is a very serious one. And like Compassion and Choices, Final Exit Network has a addendum to attach to your advanced directive. They named it, a terrible name, it's called SAD, Supplementary Advanced Directive for Dementia Directive or some such thing. But the point is that it covers basically the things that you do, but it comes with free legal backup if someone or some organization is denying your choice. And we spend a lot of time in courts around the country just fighting for the freedom of speech and freedom of choice in this area. Slide. So how does this all work? You know, we're all volunteers. We're supported entirely by our donors. We have like me, I'm a speaker. We have 20-some speakers around the country. We have this group of counselors who will be on the telephones with people. How does this all work? Well, people contact us through the website, and those of you who are here can get a free one-year membership, which will get you some additional magazines and information on this. You can decide whether you like it or not, or whether it's worth for you. We have a volunteer group of physicians who make sure that the people who are applying for this assistance and options on how to die on their own terms are medically in situations where they, in fact, it's a legitimate case. It's not some young person who's unhappy for some reason and wants to, end their life. And so these physicians scan and look over the medical records and the application and decide whether or not they qualify according to the conditions that we need to have to stay on the right side of the law and make sure this is all proper and legal. So a guide is a person who has gone through lots of training, who will, first of all, we have guides that work on the telephones. They're called coordinators. You would call up, they would consult with you as long as it takes, as many calls as you want, and basically hundreds of people use this service just to educate themselves, get information, and feel comfortable. Only a small percentage of them actually say, well, I want to have these services. Most of the people have this sorted out in their own minds and hearts and know, what other options that they have short of this. The guides then are assigned to the person, and there are two of them, and they will come to your home free of charge, give you what they call an educational visit, make sure you understand all the ins and outs and the how-tos. They will come back a second time, also free of charge, to be there on the day of your self-deliverance. I hate that word. It's kind of a euphemism. I like real words like die and death, not passing on, and there's other euphemisms. So the education is also done at no charge. Next slide. I think I've said about this. We do not provide drugs, equipment, anything, physical help in doing anything. It's all education, moral support. We are there with you and for you, but this is a do-it-yourself thing. So you really need to know what you're doing, and we provide all the information and the moral support for you to decide what you want to do. You can change your mind up to the last minute, but it really is your choice. Next slide. Okay, this is a little where you go for information. Just look up finalexitnetwork.org, and you'll be given access to all these different resources. I'd like to highlight the first one, the Good Death Society blog. We've had 84,000 people who have read the different blogs that are posted on there. There are current blog posts, usually 4 or so, recent ones that have been posted, and then there's an archive on any of these subjects that you're interested in. VSED, voluntary stopping eating and drinking, dementia, directives, anything you can think of. There are short, well-written, reader-friendly posts on there that you can start to educate yourself. It's a very good resource. There are 2 new services that we provide. One, we hired a professional trainer of what we call surrogates. These are power of attorneys who speak for you when you can't. And if you think that your spouse or a neighbor or a lawyer is not the right person, we provide free of charge our surrogate to get in contact with you and work with you to decide who should be your surrogate, what their powers should be, and work with the surrogate to make sure they are, how did you say, assertive up to the point of being aggressive? Yeah. That's the kind of person. So that's a free service. And the second one, I guess, is the Advanced Directive for Dementia. It comes with the legal support. We're continually looking for new ways that we can put power and control back into your hands when you face the end. And I think this is the end of my talk. Any questions?
None so far. You've been very clear.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity to come back to Colorado. I lived in Boulder for many years, and I realized that this town isn't Boulder, but I feel at home anyway. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gary and Diane. Such a wealth of knowledge and education. So grateful. So I have a lovely angel up here looking, mournful, too. Anyways, because conversations about death and dying are never easy. And I really believe to ease the journey, we have to have power of choice for that autonomy and that empowerment. And the more you can educate yourself, the more you can get a direct care plan going, and the more you can share that with your loved ones so that they know what your final wishes are. So there's one element here which we're talking heavily about is your own self-empowerment and making your own choices. But in the end, what it really comes down to as well is sharing that care plan with your family and your loved ones. Next slide. So my job as a conscious dying coach and a death doula is to educate people on all these choices. So I'm so grateful for these incredible networks and resources out there that people have worked so hard to educate all of us for. And with that, there's so many choices, just like in your spirituality or your particular tradition or religion or family traditions. Globally, there's so many options out there. So I'm going to talk about today options of your final disposition or your final options for after death care of your body. So next slide, please. So with those choices, along with choices during your dying process, you will be empowered to have what your belief system and your personal values can really pave the way for the choices you make. So number one, obviously, we all know about the traditional casket burial, and a pro of this is that entire funeral industries have been designed to support you in your journey around death and dying and care of your loved one, care of like even beautiful caskets and placed in the ground in these gorgeous cemeteries. But I'm going to tell you the cons of some of these is that traditional casket burial is extremely expensive, ranging anywhere average $7,000 to $10,000, upwards of $40,000. So they really can bankrupt families in the end sometimes, and they have to take out loans. It can be a massive financial burden for families. Mass amounts of metal. Hardwoods are used from rainforests are used for these big sealable concrete or polyurethane vaults, and that's to help preserve the body and also to help the graveyard look beautiful still. Once there's decomposition, the vault helps maintain the level ground. So embalming, that's a very traditional, modern way of dealing with our loved ones when they die, is actually extremely carcinogenic for the embalmers themselves, and those fluids, when they finally get an opportunity to decompose and leach into the ground, which eventually they do, can really cause huge environmental impacts. Next slide. So we have traditional fire cremation. And fire cremation, this is an urn with ashes. Fire cremation is really accessible. 60% of people in the U.S. are choosing to have flame or fire cremation. And it's much cheaper than a traditional casket burial and embalming. But it also carries a massive environmental impact. They say your average cremation amounts to driving 600 miles in a car. And also the heavy metals that are released into the environment and into the air can be very dangerous and very carcinogenic to surrounding communities. Next slide. So a lot of you are hearing the term green burial or natural burial, and I think this is really catching on for a lot of ways. But a green burial is really defined as a burial with the least amount of environmental impact, and often with ecological restoration components that come with it in terms of restoration of the land, planting natural plants that grow in the area. All materials are biodegradable in a natural burial. Sometimes all you have to do is ask your local cemetery, hey, can I have a natural burial? I don't want embalming. There's not a single law in this country that makes you embalm unless you're crossing state lines, or sometimes the body has to be transported out of the country. So there's no requirement for embalming. You can ask your cemetery to eliminate the vault liner. You can ask if you can just put the body in the ground in a shroud or a simple pine box. So even if a green burial cemetery or a conservation cemetery is not in your vicinity, you can always request, can I have a green burial? So that's really wonderful. Something I think is so beautiful and profound about green or natural burials is it really brings the community together in a very old traditional way of recognizing that death is a communal event and there's healing when everybody participates in the event. So it allows much more of a communal participation. Next. Human composting, really exciting, just passed in Colorado in the last year. It's an accelerated version of our natural decomposition in the ground. So it takes an average of 6 weeks. And in the end, you basically end up with a cubic yard, which is to say, to fill an entire back of a pickup truck with human compost remains, super rich soil, just like the compost that you would get from your local farmers or buy in the big bags. Can be used to re-nourish the earth. You can't grow commercial food in it. So that's the good news. You don't have to worry about that, about where your compost or vegetables are coming from. But a wonderful way to honor your loved one by then using this earth to restore degraded, areas and environment. Next slide. So this is called aquamation or water cremation, put in a vat with a solution of alkaline. In a matter of about 18 hours, it's heated up a little bit in temperature. You end up with a really nutrient-rich solution that can be flushed down the drains, but preferably, once again, used to restore the health of a land. In Denver, they're using it to grow organic flowers for flower gardens, and then these cut flowers are then sold. It's a really wonderful, gentle option on the environment, and it costs about average as a flame cremation. So, okay, next one. So with all these options, it leaves you in a place of realizing that you do have so much more choice than really what the conveyor belt gives you. I think it's really exciting, and I love educating people on these options, on these end-of-life options. So a huge part of the work I do is helping people design their final end-of-life care plan, because it can be a very overwhelming process, sometimes scary. So I take people through a process in my coaching. I've really taken a deep dive into their personal belief systems, values, care plan. And then in the end, you really have something very special to gift your family with, which is your final choices. You can reach me at akaljeet.com. That's AKALJEET.com. And it's been an honor to be here with all of you today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeet, Diane, Gary. Okay, thank you, Jeet, Diane, Gary. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, where we go from here. you have Akaljit's email, and you can certainly email her. She didn't mention this, but she's been running, or I don't know if running is the right word, but having a series of death cafes, which are more smaller, intimate groups, where people can just come and talk about their individual interests, concerns, questions, whatever. And if you email her, she will let you know about those. Also, you can contact me rather than give you my personal email, which you're welcome to, but if you just remember Senior Matters, our organization, you can email me at info@valleyseniormatters.com. If you just don't remember that or haven't written it down, Google Senior Matters, Carbondale will come up. There are contact forms on the bottom, email addresses, and we will continue to have some programs. Another resource I'd like to mention is that in Carbondale, the Center for Human Flourishing has been showing occasional films about various issues around dying, and Akaljit's also been involved in those. I've been to some of them, and they're very interesting. We certainly want to keep talking about this in the Roaring Fork Valley. We don't want this to be a one-off event. Whatever your interests in this are, whether you've got questions, whether you've got opinions, email Akaljit, email me at info@valleyseniormatters.com, and we will try to fashion programs that meet those interests if we don't already have them. There is a lot going on, but it's not very well coordinated, it's not very well known, and we want to change that. We want to help people get off that conveyor belt. So thank you all for being here tonight, and do we have some more questions, Alex?
We do have one question. Can you bury your body on your own land?
Can you what, your body?
Can you bury your body on your own land?
The question is, can you bury your body on your own land? And I see Akaljit's going to take that one.
It depends on where you are. You have to check with your local county to find out the rules and regulations. So that is the first step. Any other?
Not yet.
Okay.
Can you basically put yourself in a wooden canoe and float out to the water and have somebody shoot a flaming arrow into your remains and just burn up out there in the water?
Are you talking about a traditional Viking burial? That has definitely gained some traction as Viking burials. But I love what Caitlin Doherty, who's a mortician, and she has a organization called The Good Death. She says, it's really not practical. Basically, there's not enough fuel there. It's going to get wet. You'll be a charred chicken by the time it's done. So not real practical and probably not real legal either.
So before we conclude, I have cards here that have my email address on it, but since many of you are not in this room, my email is Diane Carter, DianeCarter, L as in long, T as in term, and C as in care, .rn@gmail.com. And I'm more than happy if you want to contact me to try and answer your questions. And if I don't know the answer, I will find it out.
And I'll give you my personal email account. It's a little difficult. I put it together in the 80s when I didn't know you were supposed to keep them short. It's Gary at, G-A-R-Y, at intercultural, 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 a little hyphen, and help. This is the place you go to get intercultural help. That was my business in those days. .com. Gary at intercultural-help.com. And I'll be happy to respond to anybody who sends me an email.
Gary, can you repeat that for me so I can type it?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Gary, G-A-R-Y, at Intercultural, Intercultural, hyphen, guion, dot, God, Gary, intercultural hyphen help, HELP.com.
Did you want to say anything else? Did you want to say anything else? I just want to end with one little phrase to think about, and that is, a life is beautiful, not because it lasts forever, but because it is fleeting.
Okay, sounds like Sakuda. The samurais.
Right.
That's what they believe.